Monday, January 12th, 2026. It is 5:06 p.m. And I'm going to call the order of the City of Burlington's Board of Finance meeting. Our first agenda is the agenda. Is there a motion on the agenda? Moved by Councilor Barlow. Is there a second? Second by Councilor Travers. Thank you. Any discussion on the agenda before we call the question? Seeing none, there is a motion with slightly different language on here, so you mind it's reading it.
Sure. I move to amend and adopt the agenda as follows. Removed from the deliberative agenda item 4.2, authorization to execute contract with Interface Studios for planning TV 2050. Planning for CAO shop.
Thank you, Councilor Barlow. Is there a second on that motion? I think I already did that, so I'm doing the second round. I apologize. I'm gonna give it to Councilor Carpenter this time. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We have our agenda. Our second item is the public forum. It's the practice of Board of Finance to first go to members of the public here in the room. Then we will go online. Is there anyone in the room who would like to address the Board of Finance? Yeah. Okay. Going online, if you want to raise your hand to address Board of Finance. And we have former City Councilor Sharon Busher. Good evening, Sharon.
Hi, I don't know if I'm going to say happy 2026. I guess I'll acknowledge it's a new year, so maybe sobering 2026. So I wanted to speak to two items on your agenda. One is tucked into the updated memo regarding the FY27 budget projections, and one of the options to generate some money is the sale of city property. And I'm glad that you gave the detail regarding, what criteria that had value, but anyways, the investment to create housing was low, and so it met certain criteria. And so I appreciate that. I'm still not a fan of selling city property, either by the city or the school department. I think when looking in the rearview mirror of most of those land transactions, we have had significant regrets. And I think it's few and far between when we say, that was a good decision. So anyways, I just wanted to make that statement, and it only yields $1 million if I only had, but it's not a huge generator of income in that process. And I assume that would be the total amount if you sold all of those properties. So anyways, that's number one. Number two is the item that now is going to come before you to evaluate the condition of our drinking water system. And I support knowing the condition. I mean, I think there's information included that we already know some of it, but we really need to know the extent of it and what we would have to do, what kind of investment we'd need to make it safer, and improve delivery and storage of our drinking water. I support this, but I am concerned once again about the ask that will come as a result of this. I am a proponent of knowing what we need to know. I don't want to put my head in the sand, but I also am very concerned about all of the various bonding that we've done and how it's going to each year get more onerous for those who have to participate in the payback of those bonds and loans. So anyways, thank you so much for hearing my comments. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharon. Is anyone else online that would like to address Board of Finance? None? Tim, thank you very much for audio.
Yeah, can we just quickly test it to see if it works?
Yep, and Carter or Allie, can you just confirm, or Buddy, that you can hear us still? We plugged in a new device.
Yep, I can hear you.
Great.
Yep, all good here.
Perfect. Sam, thank you very much. So I close public forum and we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the consent agenda. Is there a motion on the consent agenda? Moved by Counselor Chopper, seconded by Counselor Carpenter. Any discussion on the consent agenda before we vote? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. On to our first deliberative item, item 4.1, to request to add 2 positions and a tier, a 3rd position from our airport. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm with Dave Carmen and she's right there, and Marie Friedman online, as well as Jesse Sprague in the back. The memo, I think, explains 3 different items that we're looking for tonight. We're looking to add 2 positions, as the mayor said. One is the operations specialist. It's an existing position, an existing job description. We're just simply adding an additional member of the team. The second is also an existing position and also an existing job description to add the working for person ambassador or ground transportation. And then the third is to tier our maintenance worker 2 positions. Operations specialist obviously is a critical component of the airport, 24/7 under Dave Carmen's leadership as deputy director. Between we have a slim team of 7 people, including a 4-person. This would add that flexibility, especially for such a critical security and safety role.
Yeah, especially during the winter months, it gets a little bit thin for us doing a 6 operations specialist, 7 operation. With vacations, paid time off, it gets extremely thin. So this would add an offer to.
For the working for person ambassador role or ground transportation, sometimes we interchangeably use those terms. This is a 3rd shift role in the afternoon all the way through midnight. It is just as busy for us during those time periods. I'm sure many of you have flown back in and you can see the quantity of people. This would help manage our incredible ambassador team out on our curbside, our parking garage operations, some of our security elements, as well as passenger experience. And then the final position that we're looking at is tiering the maintenance worker 2. Again, we have this existing position that is current right now. We have 11 maintenance workers right now at the airport. This would allow a level of increased credentials and increased when somebody gets the time to jump a grade or have a little bit higher of a fiscal return. So the existing maintenance worker 2 is a grade 14. This second tier of the same position would be a grade 15 that we work with the Human Resources Department on. This is not adding additional maintenance workers. This is just simply tiering. So this is not adding any. So what we're here for tonight is to add all 2 new positions and then tier the 3rd position.
Thank you, both of you. Questions from the board? Hi, it's for Councilor Carpenter, then we'll go to Councilor Miller.
I'm supportive of this, and I certainly respect your analysis now, but just curious sort of big picture, how the volume of the airport's going and kind of big picture where we're at.
Yeah, I should have started with that. I think one of the primary reasons for operations and our ground transportation ambassador team and our maintenance team is because we're adding a lot of square footage, we're adding a lot of buildings, we're improving a lot of our spaces, and our passenger numbers continue to grow. We just ended calendar year 2025, unofficial numbers, but it would exceed our 2019 numbers. It will be the 2nd highest since 2008. October of 2025 is one of our prime examples. That's the first time ever in the history of the airport that we had over 80,000 outbound passengers in any single month. We did that in October of 2025. So we're growing, we're busy, and then on the operations side, they handle both lots of security elements as well as, of course, the operations out on the airfield, including snow ops. We're continuing to grow those number of operations. Landings and takeoffs is how we define those, and those continue to skyrocket. We're at about 110, 120,000 per year which with commercial service operations is the second busiest airport in New England. Boston is the only other one busier than us. So we're busy, and that's why we're definitely looking at this. Thanks. Thank you.
Counselor Bravo?
Yes, I'm also supportive. I had a question about the ambassador position. One of the things we had heard when I was involved in the vehicle for hire licensing board and some of the complaints we had around the taxi system and some of the subsequent changes that were made to taxi fares and some of the regulation we put in place for taxi drivers and vehicle for hires was around some of the complaints we had, people arriving late at night and either being extorted for like fares or not being able to get a taxi or get an Uber to come and give them transportation. So is part of this ambassador role to like basically be there as a concierge almost for people that come in when those flights come in at midnight and they don't know, they're trying to get to their hotel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Not just to point the way or point where the taxi operations are, to help guide, answer those questions when a customer and or a driver, a licensed driver has a debate of those types of rates. We can clarify that very quickly. This is not a supervisor, but a more senior level position that would help answer those questions pretty immediately. Thankfully, since we've changed some of those rates, we still have challenges, but not nearly as many non-taxi operations at night as we used to have, which is good.
Good.
But yeah, this is that third shift, midnight, coming home. Now there's a proper methodology to manage part of that as well.
Do the ambassadors, like, do they wander or are they at like a fixed location or how does that?
Yeah, they're generally in 3 or 4 locations. So a lot of times we go to the exit lane in the garage, make sure that's either managed or we help the customers directly right there. They're constantly at the curb, which is not only a customer experience element, but also a required security element of the airport. And then they also help inside, whether it's collect wheelchairs or help passengers, or in rare occasions help our operations teams and security elements as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Barlow. Any other questions or comments from the board before we look for a motion, which you can reference on Civic Clerk for this month for the details? And by reference, I mean you don't have to read it out loud, sorry, but it's very clear for the sake of, we have a lot to cover.
Make the motion as recommended on Civic.
Thank you, Councilor Barlow. Is there a second? Second by Councilor Carpenter. Thank you. Any further discussion before I call the question? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you. As folks who might be following along at home, item 4.2 was removed from the agenda when we adopted our agenda earlier. So we're moving now to item 4.3, which is the 2026 Drinking Water System Strategic Capital Planning Efforts and associated EWSRF step 1 on with our PW department and our water resources. Welcome, team. Hi all. I just want to make sure you had also faces to go with names. Rocky Vogler, he's our director of operations engineer, is going to be project managing for the distribution storage side. And then Emily Piersack, she's our asset manager, but she's stepping into a project manager role on the water treatment facility side. So tonight here we have for you 2 requests for a project that hopefully everybody recalls when we were talking about wastewater. I foreshadowed that we needed to do a very similar process for drinking water, both on the drinking water treatment facility, which is the plant plus all the pumping, as well as on our vast network of distribution and storage systems. And so this is the beginning of that process to really take a deep dive, figure out where we may have deficiencies, and then, kind of in accordance with what Sharon Busher said, I'm not expecting or hoping that this turns into a huge project. What we're hoping for is to understand what our needs are and then to have a good 15-year capital plan of how we're going to pay for all of that. But I don't know until we get into the process. And so
That in particular is why with the drinking water treatment facility, we're proposing the amount of money that we have could get us to a simple plan if things stay in the simple range. But if we determine that large overhaul or upgrades to the treatment process or capacity are needed, then we very likely will be coming back to you for sort of the last phase of that. We just don't know right now. I think that's mostly what I have to say. It's very important. Our drinking water, we only have one drinking water system. It is very, very old, particularly on the distribution side, but our drinking water plant, was last upgraded in 1984. So it's on a 40-year-old horizon at this point. Drinking water is a lot less harsh than the wastewater, so it's not as in our face, but nonetheless, it is a very critical piece of our system. Particularly with all of the housing that we want to see in the city, we want to make sure that we're not having any sort of capacity problems, both at the plant as well as out in the distribution network.
Okay. Questions or comments from anything else from the rest of the teams? Thanks for being here, everyone. Any questions or comments from the board?
So I read the memo, and then I appreciated the email you sent that showed where this fits in the sort of the grand plan. On page 8 of the memo, it said that we need to get the project, whatever the project ends up being, cannot proceed to construction borrowing until additional voter approval is secured.
Right.
So this is like when we broke the water bonds out, we said we're gonna do one tranche, like with the approval that we got last town meeting day, and this would be a subsequent
Yes.
approval that would be required.
Yes, it's potential that some of the things that are identified on the water treatment side might overlap with some of the construction money that we have. The $20 million drinking water bond was largely for our reservoir. There is money in there for distribution systems because we know there's all sorts of projects, transportation projects, things like that that are happening, and pipes that need investment now without us doing a citywide plan. And then there's a small amount, I think it was like $2 million of money that was sort of set aside for like super high priority, can't wait drinking water facility stuff. But before we really would take on the work of this, there would be a whole additional public conversation about what's needed, what the rate impacts are, so on and so forth. And if you point back to the water sustainable infrastructure plan, where we kind of laid it out, my goal was to have this nugget of money, what we need, before we come back to the voters for the remaining wastewater work, right? The East plant that we sort of pushed off, so that we can have a bigger picture view of all the things that are needed, and we can do any additional prioritization within and across the waters.
Okay, so this is a loan
This is a loan for just this.
for just this, and then it would be rolled into
Yes.
bonds that we would authorize and then
Yep.
draw down. So what happens if there isn't voter approval for subsequent bond? I'm not saying there wouldn't be, I'm saying just as a contingency plan, can we keep the loan, or is the loan of a short term?
I guess we've never gone to that. When it gets rolled, I know that when it gets rolled into a construction loan, it takes, so say this, $1 million or whatever, then gets rolled into a construction loan at the 2%. Whereas if it stays as a note, it's only 0%, but I will have to get back to you on that question.
Just so we have a basis.
Yeah, we're allowed to borrow without specific borrowing authorization, because they know you kind of need to do this work to get to the authorization. But I don't know if 10 years passed and we weren't able to secure bonding, what then would happen. So that's a good question.
Last question, and I'm sorry if you've covered this in other presentations, but why can't we just use bonding proceeds that are already authorized to do this planning? Or could we?
I guess we could, but because because this money we know doesn't need to be paid back until the completion of the project, right? So usually you end up starting to pay on a loan 1 year after the entire project is completed. I'd rather have our money that we've secured now for the current projects that we have ongoing.
Well, this, oh, let me go back.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is a better deal, basically, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I suppose if we never had a project, state of Vermont would have to come to us and, I don't know, put a lien on the city, but, you know, I mean, my sense is, happens rarely, but you would negotiate it out with the state.
We would figure out something, and these loans, step 1, step 2 are always at 0% admin, so
Yeah.
it's not free, but it's as free as you can get in the world of borrowing and trying to use other sources of money to advance what you need to do.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Mindful of other items we have to get to as well, so is there a motion on this item? So I'm willing and ready. And also reference the clerk on this one too.
I will move to, I would move to approve and recommend that the city council waive the reading and adopt the attached resolution. Hope this is the right one.
There's 2, yeah.
And you could even reference specific clerk
Okay.
for the action and just noting that there's two motions.
I move to approve the finance committee actions as are listed on city clerk, and note that there are 2 actions that we are.
Thank you, Councilor. Just trying to be efficient, guys. Thank you for that. Is there a second?
I will second, but I do have a couple follow-up questions. I know there's time sensitivities tonight, but I'll second the motion.
Okay, seconded by Councilor Travers. Is there more discussion, Councilor Travers?
Yeah, so just one question and then one point. The one question is, it appears that in the resolution, in addition to approving or seeking the loan, that we're also approving the contract with Wright Pierce. And I guess I understand the efficiencies involved from an administrative standpoint with using the same third party that is working with us already. But can you speak to what efficiencies may be being realized from a cost standpoint here? I mean, I would think that this may be the type of project that, notwithstanding our already doing work with them, we may even put it out for RFP or something along those lines. Just wondering if you can speak to from a cost standpoint, if you think that working with the folks we're working with already is the best bang for the buck in this case.
And I just want to clarify the reason why we did do a separate RFQ for drinking water. So they do happen to be our engineer on the wastewater side. And while that gives us some level of familiarity, it is a different like group or section within Wright Pierce. So then there is some cost efficiency having the 2 separate projects, the distribution and storage of the water treatment plant, just because some of the information that we need to get, like growth estimate numbers, demand numbers, right? We need that globally for the water treatment plant to know how much water we have to produce. But then we also need to know spatially exactly where those pockets are, because we need to know that something's happening on North Ave and that we look at that pipe and make sure that our model trues everything out. There is then further interplay with water quality. Some of the things that we're going to be looking at in the distribution system about making sure that we are producing excellent water quality up to the tap of the furthest reaches of our system depend on what's going on at the drinking water plant and which disinfectant we choose and so on and so forth. So if we had separate engineers for the distribution storage for the water treatment plant, we would be having to do lots of cross-pollination. And I think probably, I don't think it would be huge, but there would be added cost of trying to get this group to talk to that group. I've experienced that on the wastewater side with some of our projects, and while we're able to muddle through it, it is easier to have everybody talking the same language and look at the same project. Does that answer your?
No, it does. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And they were the most qualified for both areas. It wasn't like we had somebody we preferred and was stronger in distribution, and that we just decided to go with Wright Pierce for the 2 of them. They were the strongest all around, both vertical, like treatment plant stuff, as well as horizontal.
Makes sense. Thank you. And I suppose just the one point I want to make out loud is, I mean, I've been a strong supporter of the wastewater project. Anticipate I will continue to be a strong supporter of this project. Was also a strong supporter of the Burlington High School and Tech project. we have looked at these projects mostly in isolation though, right? And I think voters have too, as they've approved the bonds for these projects and have said, okay, well, that project in and of itself sounds like it's something that I can afford. The next project in and of itself sounds like something I can afford. But I think we are now seeing as we approach FY27 that these projects have a cumulative effect. And we're seeing that in terms of what the sort of default property tax increase will be for FY27 just on debt service and retirement. So I suppose what I want to say out loud is as we continue to sort of move forward with these large projects, I do think that the city is making future choices to a certain extent about our continuing to focus our priorities on big projects like water resources, like the high school tech center. And that there's likely, as we're doing now for FY27, unfortunately, going to have to be some balancing in terms of other city resources and services. So I just, as we move forward with this effort, want to make sure that we're noting that for the record. It's likely a point we're going to have to return to in the future.
Absolutely, but it needs to be a data-driven conversation, and right now I can't present you, like, I want you to have all of the data so that then all of those choices, those very hard choices can be made across the board, right? So that's what this is about. This is not about deciding that we're going this direction or that direction. It's about bringing the data back and letting you know, bare minimum what needs to happen, and then what are the other steps, hopefully in a phased way to keep up with the growth in the city. We have very excellent source water quality, although it is changing in Lake Champlain. I hope that it's not changing so fast that we have to do some sort of intervention now, but we're going to be taking a look at that to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for the future and not we're having a challenge with the water.
Not for tonight, but I would really be interested in, and working with planning, kind of what you think the growth is of units that are going to need infrastructure as opposed to, you know, there's a lot of renovation going on, there's other things going on. I'm just sort of curious what you think that growth is looking like.
Yep, and that's some of what we're trying to figure out and making sure that our model is up to date so that when a big project comes in, we can run the scenario of, okay, when this is on board, is everybody else going to still be okay with water, or are we going to need a bigger pipe, so that we can have those conversations with developers, so that we can talk about other financing mechanisms, other money that they can bring to the table. So it's not just on ratepayers, but we don't have all of those tools just quite yet. Okay, we ready to vote? Call the question. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Water folks, appreciate it. Moving right along, it's a memo from my office, item 4.4, which is the use of the unassigned fund balance request to fund Turning Point Center for the fiscal year 25, regarding a fiscal year 25 annual payment. And I've asked Jen Moroza-Karsu, this is your first Board of Finance appearance officially, who is my Deputy Chief of Staff Executions Director. Welcome, Jen. Can you just give a very brief overview, just to give folks just a couple minutes of the history here and why we have to come to Board of Finance, and then we'll see if there's any questions.
Sounds good. So since about FY14, I believe, the city of Burlington has made an annual payment from its regional programs appropriation to the Turning Point Center for their work. I mean, this is critical city work to support Burlington residents in recovery for substance and or alcohol addiction. In FY23, the prior mayoral administration and city council approved an increase in this annual regional appropriations amount from $4,500 to $17,450. And this was essentially intended to more fully capture kind of what the Turning Point Center was doing for the city of Burlington. Unfortunately, during the budget process for FY25 and efforts to close the $14 million budget gap at that time, this $17,450 appropriation for the Turning Point Center did not make it into the regional programs budget at that time. And there was, unfortunately, a breakdown in communications. So this was not communicated to the Turning Point Center. So unbeknownst to them, they crafted their budget for that calendar year, anticipating this payment from the city. And then this was not, I guess this oversight wasn't really discovered until they invoiced the city for this in early fall this year. And so of course, we want to honor our long partnership with this organization. We want to make this right. We understand that, given their budget, having a gap of that amount is actually quite substantial for them. And so hence our request to come to Board of Finance to take this money from the unassigned fund balance. We were unable to locate other funds to cover this, including from the opioid settlement monies. And, just talking about process, we would like to make sure that things like this do not happen in the future. And my understanding is that there haven't always been very good systems for how to navigate different regional program contributions every year. And so, we want to continue to work with City Council through the CD&R committee and in the FY27 budgeting process to basically create more clarity and to standardize how we fund community organizations. And then we want to have a system for providing clear communication so that this kind of oversight doesn't happen again. Yeah.
Check this off. I'm at Board of Finance. Well, actually, that's premature. Are there questions and comments from the board on this item? Okay, is there a motion on this item?
Move to take the actions on the clerk.
Thank you, Councilor Chambers. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilor Barlow. Thank you. Any further discussion before we call the question? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries unanimously. Now you can check it off your bucket list. Thank you.
Thank you,
And thank you,
Councilors.
Jen, for helping to steward this piece that was sort of a little bit on the pending list for a little while. And thank you, Turning Point, for your patience on this. Moving right along, I am going to try to give us about 15 minutes on this item, and then I'm going to save 10 solid, hopefully a little bit more for the last item and see where we are, folks. I think it's 6 o'clock. Our next item is a presentation by our Department of Finance Administration regarding our fiscal year 27 budget and where we are in this process. Hand it over to our.
Thank you very much. Given the time constraints, I will try and go quickly. This is the second kind of major presentation to this group. The first presentation was about a month ago. We are still looking at an estimated $10 to $12 million gap. That has not changed. And there is quick context on this slide about how we arrived at that gap. I will not go into that, but if you are following along at home or otherwise new to this, I encourage you to read that. Some new information before we really dive in. Since we met last, our department staff have been hard at work finalizing personnel budgets, really updating them with the most recent information, and you can see that here. That is in line with our expectations and is across the general fund an increase of about 7.5%. We are still working with estimates for health insurance and workers' compensation. We are also working this week with departments to verify their operational expenses, meaning things not related to personnel, and on more exact revenue estimates. And now we'll spend the rest of our time figuring out and talking about how we are going to structure the solution. We've talked about the gap of $10 to $12 million on a city budget for the general fund, which this year is about $107 million. That is about a 10% gap. And as you can see here, we are currently exploring and proposing using a variety of approaches to fill that gap. We certainly don't have just one thing that will give us that $10 to $12 million. First up is raising the police and fire property tax. We spoke about this in more depth last month. It is the most time-sensitive one. because we need a city council vote to put this on the ballot for Burlingtonians by the end of January. The December presentation had a lot more details about the police and fire tax. It was pretty centered on that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it tonight. But if we were to have a 5-cent increase on that tax, it would raise just over $3 million. And that would go a long way towards helping out the costs for those departments. The current tax is only raising about $6.5 million a year, and the department budgets are over $39 million a year. Knowing, as I said, we will have to employ multiple strategies to meet the budget need. Another one that we are hard at work on is reducing our expenses. And we have asked every general fund department to provide concrete ideas for cutting at both a 5% level and a 10% level of each department's net draw on the general fund. And those proposals have been reviewed by the mayor and myself. We're working on clarifying questions and things of that sort with the department heads. And you'll see that includes delaying hiring, not filling vacant positions, and reduction of existing city services and staff. And conservatively, those reductions could total $2 to $3 million. That, of course, all of these will need to be discussed in further detail, not only internally, but also with unions and the Board of Finance and City Council. Another item that we have been discussing is a possible voluntary furlough program. After discussing it first with the union and then on an all-employee call, we sent out a survey to employees, not including police and fire, asking them to let us know their interest. You can see that on this slide. Based on that data, which we gathered, we would only save about $100,000 to $200,000. Based on this information, we have reopened that survey for employees, hoping that we could get more than this 25% initial response rate. Now that people have had, it's not over the holidays, and we were also able to provide some clarifying information that people had on exactly how that furlough program might work. So stay tuned to see if more savings might be able to be realized through that. A sort of companion idea was a voluntary early retirement program. And we put out a survey along with the voluntary furlough survey. And you can see the response rate here. We also crunched the numbers on this. And unfortunately, this model shows that the city would lose money if we were to offer this program. And so this is one that at this time we are no longer pursuing. In addition to reducing expenses, we are looking to increase revenue. And this specifically is about one-time revenue, which, as we all know, we are doing our best to turn away from and make sure we're using sustainable sources. But want to make sure we're also being thorough as we talk about our options. And so you can see in bullet 1 why the unassigned fund balance is not a good choice this year. There may be some other kind of pockets of money from what I am calling kind of long forgotten dedicated tax balances. There's obviously more to discuss here, but we have limited time. I will suffice it to say that, to the best of my knowledge, this is money that is on the books that departments are not currently relying on. And as we have been discussing initially with the city attorney's office, there would be some restrictions on how we could use this, but we could also do it in a way that would be general fund relieving if we wanted to after further discussion. Collections. This was an idea that several employees brought forward. We also, in addition to the survey, asked all city employees if they had any ideas on how to decrease expenses or increase revenues, to send those to us. And we're still going through them. But I will say probably 5 to 10 different people put in an idea related to doing a better job on collecting overdue or past due revenues that are owed to the city. These exist in a variety of areas. You can see this here, everything from parking tickets to building permits. And more work remains to be done to see exactly how much in each area could be collectible, or we think is really reasonable to be collectible, and what resources would be needed, and how we would want to apply those resources. But it's money that's out there, and we probably do want to talk about some realistic estimate to include in next year's budget. And then, as Sharon Busher said, we have included the idea of looking at some of the strategic city-owned property and figuring out if that is something we would want to include in this year's budget. This is the criteria that we have developed, and as we're looking across the city, this is what we're looking at. And then you can see here, there are several properties, I want to say between 4 and 6, that fall under this cell with low difficulty criteria. And what I have here is really preliminary. The properties that we're looking at, none of them have buildings, they're vacant or used for parking. This number, about 40 or more new housing units, that is the smallest number. It could be much larger than that. And the working estimate here is one that, if we want to pursue it, would need more fleshing out, because there's several different properties. We have what the city has assessed those values at, not necessarily. It's likely we could get much more on the commercial market. So there's more work to be done here as well, but we wanted to start that conversation and see if that's something that this board and the council is open to having. So this is very, very early math, but this is one way that we could put together a solution. And it gets us to just over $10 million. And it helps us start to think about some of the trade-offs here. As I mentioned at the beginning, in the next meeting or two, we will need to revisit putting this 5-cent increase to the police and fire property tax on the ballot. And so, for instance, if this board did not want to move forward with that, and we were going to look for $3 million somewhere else, and we needed to look for it in cuts, that would mean taking our average salary of $55,000 for someone working in the general fund. That would be laying off 39 people. And so these, as you know, part of why I have this here is not that this is what I expect that our budget will look like on June 30th at all, but it is to allow us to start to make these trade-offs. Because it's okay to say you don't want something in this line, but then something else has to grow or shrink accordingly. So very briefly, and I think this is my last slide, each of these solutions is sort of working on its own timeline. We do need an answer on the tax increase by January 26th. And we are continuing to engage with the unions. We've got another call with them coming up. City employees, we've got a call with them coming up next week. And all of that is towards getting very detailed presentations to the city council in April for our budget nights. And with that, if we have time, we will have questions and discussion.
Thank you, Catherine. Two things. One is I just want to remind the board that we have a resolution by council referred to us on the police and fire question. Depending on where this discussion goes tonight, I would like to be able to bring that to a vote next Tuesday. We have 3 Board of Finance speak to see where we are for that discussion, because as Catherine just said, the drop dead date is the 26th, and I don't like to cut things super duper close, so I would like to just have that as part of the next discussion. And 2 other very quick things. I have appreciated, we have been meeting with city councilors to engage. Many of you participated in just informational sessions on where we have been in the last week or so. I appreciate that. We'll keep, as Catherine said, we'll keep doing that. So it's not just concentrated to this meeting. We really want to be as upfront as we can be as we continue to develop final recommendations from each department and what we're going to advance. And just to make sure we can spend the last 7 minutes fully on this topic, I have asked Interim Director Lynn Reagan, maybe that's hours, Interim Director, if we can postpone item 6 till next Tuesday, so we don't feel we have to rush the reclassification discussion. And she said yes, so we will do that. Just whatever. We'll do that procedurally after we're done this discussion before we close the meeting. So with that, questions or discussions from the board?
Please, a couple of things. Voluntary furlough, can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what do you mean by that? What, a day off or a year off? And what would your expectation be?
As we have envisioned this program, it would be up to 80 hours a year unpaid. And it would be done in conjunction with the supervisor and department head.
Okay.
So it would need to be scheduled. So for instance, I'm just now picking on Lynn because she's right there and we're talking about her. We couldn't have all the HR managers taking the exact same week off. People would still be accruing their health, they'd still be getting health insurance, accruing vacation time. Those benefits would stay in place. Any other specific questions?
There's also only certain people.
Yes, and only certain people would qualify. I said no fire and no police. Beyond that, we haven't made a distinction because I think it will, that will need to be made at more of a department head level. So we haven't said that there's anyone else isn't qualified. We said for now, if you are open and you want to consider it, you can say confidentially fill out the survey. And should we move forward with this program, then we'll take that to sort of the next level.
Just an observation, and I may be wrong about wanting to give people a little more opportunity. I mean, maybe for them, a half a day, couple times a month would be more meaningful. So it's only 80 hours. I would encourage us to ask, is there something else you've got in mind that would be useful to you or your family, and you will choose not to give me that. So I wouldn't box it to the 80 hours, because we might get people who are looking for work flexibility that. My other observation about this one-time property sale. You mentioned something that properties that could do 40 units or could not do 40 units? I was unclear.
Sorry, I was very, I was not clear about the 40 units. The 40 units is a very conservative estimate based on just a couple of specific properties. And so I guess I don't want people to get hung up on the city only has properties that they want to sell that could only be turned into 40 housing units. It is possible it could be much more than 40. Depends on exactly the properties in play that we were to choose. I don't like to have no quantities up here, and I was being conservative.
Maybe I'm still not understanding what, I don't even know what we own, but I would encourage us to look at smaller properties. And we just had this neighborhood gold, if you can sell, 4 things for $300,000 each, that could add up. And I don't even know if we own those little properties. But
Yes, sorry, some of them are. So
Yeah.
some of them, it's like piecing together many small to get to
Okay.
this 40. Okay, great question. Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Barlow?
I also had questions. Thank you for answering the questions I sent over earlier today. Sean, but I also had questions about the furlough program. It's 80 hours a year. That's only at 1.5 hours a week. And I agree with Councilor Carpenter that there's many employers who have more flexible schedules, and full-time is as few as 32 hours a week. And there may be people who want that flexibility. And so I'm wondering, I don't know, within the constraints of our collective bargaining agreements, what we can and can't do with retirement systems, all of that. But, I could envision perhaps a scenario where there may be more opportunity in the furlough program if there's people who want that kind of flexibility and are willing to work fewer than 40 hours a week. So I would encourage us to pursue that a little bit more and expand on what the current is.
Definitely heard Councilor Barlow and Councilor Carpenter. We floated this proposal, word in bargaining, but like proposal to just even see if there's any uptick on this first draft. And we reopened, as Catherine said, the survey to see if folks wanted more time to think about it. And also, if people are taking more time away unpaid, we're not expecting them to cram even more time into the existing time that they are paid. So much like when we went through Modern Gov changes last year, we're just mindful of the ripple effect of workloads and whatnot. So the more hours you add to growth, there's a lot of just moving parts. This is a new concept for the city, and so feedback heard, and we're trying to navigate a few different things as we stand up what this ultimately might be as a proposed program.
One other thought on this is that we don't lose institutional knowledge if the alternative is a RIF.
Yep.
We would retain that experience until maybe times were better and people wanted more hours then. The other thing that along the same lines is this idea of job sharing, which is more a part-time thing where you have 2 people that inhabit the same position, so to speak. So I don't know. Just that idea of
Thank you, Councilor Barlow. Any other questions? Councilor Travers?
Yeah. So I know we're right up against 6 o'clock here. I want to first of all acknowledge the difficulty that this puzzle presents here, and just appreciate all the work that has gone into this for the presentation this evening. I also want to give voice though to some concerns that I'm sure you all have as well. Just a few different things. One is one item that I don't think is referenced in this presentation is I would still like for us to operate under the assumption that our gross receipts tax increase is sunsetting as currently set forth in ordinance. At the moment, I would not be supportive of our continuing with an expanded gross receipts tax. And in fact, would even like for us to consider lowering or perhaps eliminating some of our gross receipts tax, particularly those on admissions and amusements, because they are actually double paying both our local gross receipts tax on admissions and amusements as well as our local option sales tax. So I think that presents an additional gap if we are to allow the gross receipts tax to sunset as it is. I also have some question marks around. I mean, I appreciate very much the creativity that has gone into finding some of these resources here, but I have some question marks around them. I'm concerned that enhanced collections, $1 million may be overly optimistic for FY27. I'm worried that the sale of city property may not be a wise idea in and of itself unless we're really guaranteed that we're going to get significant housing, including affordable housing out of it. And I don't know if that's something that we're actually going to be able to bring forward and realize in FY27. And I'm worried that it perpetuates one of the issues that we're unfortunately faced with now, which is the use of one-time resources that would not then be available in FY28 and thereafter. The utilization of one-time revenues, CEO Shada, I emailed you about this earlier today, and I think we will need some additional clarity with respect to which one-time revenues we are speaking about here. To the extent the dedicated taxes that are referenced in the presentation are taxes set aside for items like the Conservation Legacy Fund or the Penny for Parks program, I have questions around the propriety of our using taxes for general fund sources. I believe the Penny for Parks program, and not to say we're actually looking at that, but just to use that as an example, is dedicated to parks capital projects, can't be used for general fund resources. So I think I'll need some additional information with respect to exactly which revenue sources we're talking about here and the propriety of it. And then even beyond that, to the extent we're talking about, even if we can, using some of these resources for other goals, whether or not that's in the best interest of these projects. If we're talking about the Conservation Legacy Fund, for example, I mean, this is a fund that, as a result of legal review over the course of the last year, has already been cut in more than half. So our stewards of that at the Parks Department and our Conservation Board are already operating with less to do the important work of the Conservation Legacy Fund. And if we were to be looking at some of that to repurpose those funds for other uses, I'm concerned about the consequences that it may have for those other resources. So all of that is to say, I am worried that even the $3 million we've identified as necessary to meet with a 5 to 10% cut to departmental budgets may not be enough, right? And I'm worried about whether or not voters will support a 5-cent public safety tax increase, but I'm also worried whether or not 5 cents is enough, right? And whether or not we need to be considering a number even larger than that, or else find ourselves in a position where we're having to realize even steeper cuts than the 5 to 10% that are anticipated right now, which I think brings me around to sort of my last point here, which is that I appreciate the work that's ongoing as to how we're going to address that, but it is, and I know we may not have answers before the end of this month, but it is difficult, and it will be difficult for us to decide on a 5-cent property tax increase, or whether or not that should be more, or whether or not it should be less, without additional guidance as to what city services are actually potentially on the chopping block with a 5 to 10% cut. I mean, we speak about it as our departments are looking at it, but like ultimately, we need to know that if we move forward with a 5-cent increase or something less or more than that, what the potential impact is going to be on residents in terms of what services we're going to have to potentially look at cutting back on. I know that that's a tall hill to climb between now and the end of the month, and that we'll have to continue to look at this into the spring. But if at all possible, I think it would be helpful for us to have some better information on exactly what we're looking at. Are we looking at services? Are we looking at staff? We mentioned 39 potential layoffs. If we don't do the 5-cent increase, well, how many potential layoffs are we looking at if we do the 5-cent increase? So I think that's information that would be helpful as we continue here. So sorry, I went on at length there, but I don't get to talk in the council, so I appreciate the chance to talk about it here.
Thank you, Councilor Travers. I see your hand and Councilor Nudizer. You'll have the last comment in just a moment, but just very brief responses to Councilor Travers' few points raised. Just a couple of quick things to remind the board. In our presentation in December, I believe we gave you a projection of what we're anticipating the debt service splinter tax and the retirement splinter tax, in addition to what this 5-cent increase would be in totality, because those two splinter taxes I just mentioned are driven by our charter. We don't have control over what that would be. That automatically increases taxes for voters without council nor voter approval each year. That total will be just over 9% in terms of just the municipal side of the tax bill. And we're mindful about affordability here and being sure that we be very thoughtful about if any other tax increases were needed to voters. With, again, I share Councilor Travis Webb, are we going to make sure we get an affirmative vote from voters, depending what that number would be? I think they'd be very thoughtful on that. I've also been in touch with the superintendent because, of course, they're preparing their budget at the same time. I don't think they're through their process yet, but I'm mindful of what that will be. In addition, it will not be like last year where there was actually a reduction in the school tax side of things for taxpayers here in Burlington. Just briefly, I wish I have many wishes this time. I wish our budgeting process was on the same same timeline as the school budget, and that has just not been the practice in Burlington. That is many mayors prior to me. From many different parties. It is a misaligned process, and it is hard, especially in a hard budgeting year, for that to be the reality of our city. So we are trying to accelerate. Your request is very much an accelerated one. We have been trying to do that anyway to bring basically a much faster mayor presented budget to you, so you have the details to work on. And we have a lot of moving parts though that we have to think about in terms of union engagement and employee engagement and all of that to work with, because these are positions and people's livelihoods that we're working with. So absolutely heard. And it's literally a 4-month accelerated process to try to get everything sequentially in a place before you were to be asked to vote on the police and fire dedicated taxes. So this is why it's not even here. I'm using a plane analogy that we're at 10,000 foot, we can bring it to 8,000 with tonight's presentation. We're trying to land this plane and working in good faith with what we can present you. And I hope that we can get you at least enough context and information for affirmative vote next week on police and fire. So we'll keep engaging. Councilor Newbeeser, thank you for letting me respond there. Do you want to just wrap us up with your final comment or question, and then we'll see where we are with adjourning?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly comment. I appreciate all the information. One piece of information for future conversation I wanted to request was just getting a sense of, over the last, I don't know exactly the time horizon I'm asking for, but going pretty far back, at least a decade or two, sort of what is our ownership of public land been, and sort of what's the curve on that, so to speak? Do we have a massive amount of publicly owned land as compared to 30 years ago? Just to get a rough sense of where we are would be helpful for me. I don't, just to speak a little bit to some of the discussion, I do see using public land in this way a little bit differently, because it's creating a new ongoing revenue source by growing the property tax base. And so I would sort of disagree slightly there. And then finally, I hope that we don't go down the path, and I am open to continued discussion, but we spend more money supporting our business community compared to any locality in the entire state of Vermont, period. End of discussion. And that's a good thing. We have a thriving small business community. We, on a dime, spent $600,000 to open up Main Street more frequently when there was construction. During the pandemic, commercial properties, not even small business owners, commercial landlords got massively favorable assessments, and residents' property taxes went through the roof. I absolutely will not entertain, and obviously it's a democracy, but my personal view is we should not entertain the idea that we're going to indulge in the sunset, which is exactly why we shouldn't have gone down a sunset route, because it's setting us up for a fiscal cliff again this year. But the idea that then we're even going to go further and lower that and put the burden on property taxpayers and ask for a larger increase at the same time we're talking about trying to keep housing affordable, I just think you can't square that. And so I really want to be mindful that if my friends across the aisle want to pursue that, I want to see where we're going to find a couple more $1 million in addition to closing a $10 million gap, which I just want to remind folks we've inherited after a decade of leadership under the previous mayor. So that's where I am. I look forward to the collaboration. I also just want to say too, I found all the budget processes so far transparent and collaborative, and I've appreciated working with the administration over these last few cycles figuring out these hard problems. Every single piece of feedback that I heard in the last budget cycle, and some of which I gave directly, some of which other folks in the public or in the council gave, you all have incorporated, both in ideas around voluntary retirement, voluntary furlough, like all of those ideas have been incorporated. We've started early, often, and this has been a really transparent and collaborative process, so I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. And with that, since there is no action on this item, and given that we are over time, I'm gonna land this plane and keep that analogy going. I would entertain a motion on our next item to table that item until our next meeting on January 20th.
Well, I would move to postpone it.
Move to postpone, okay, move to postpone by Counselor Travers, to January 20th, seconded by Counselor Barlow, thank you. All in favor of tabling item number 6 for January 20th, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. We'll table that and take that up next time. And with that, with no other items in front of Board of Finance, I adjourn the meeting at 6:12 p.m.